My name is Veronica Stone, and strictly speaking, I am no longer employed. For 13 years, I was the invisible hand guiding the Integrated Operations Department at Aegis Manufacturing Group, a sprawling facility of steel and silicon located in the sun-bleached industrial sprawl of Arizona. At 47 years old, I had conditioned myself to exist in the background, operating under the philosophy that if I was doing my job correctly, the executive board would barely know I existed. My office, a corner suite overlooking the shipping docks, was not a place of glamour. It was a command center of controlled chaos. From that desk, I monitored a supply chain so fragile and interconnected that a single delayed shipment of microconductors from Taiwan could ripple through the system and halt the assembly lines in Phoenix 3 weeks later. I was the fail-safe. I was the redundancy. I was the person who translated the messy, unpredictable reality of human error into the clean, profitable lines of a quarterly spreadsheet. But in the corporate world, silence is often mistaken for absence, and competence, when it looks too easy, is often mistaken for obsolescence. The transition of power did not happen with a grand announcement or a boardroom showdown. It happened with a suffocating casualness that hurt more than a shouting match ever could. When Hugh Montgomery, the CEO, walked into my workspace, he brought with him the scent of expensive cologne and the distracted air of a man who had already mentally checked out for the weekend. He didn't look at the flowcharts on my wall or the 3 monitors displaying live diagnostic feeds from the factory floor. He looked through me. The conversation, if you could call it that, was brief. He informed me that his son, Blake, needed a landing pad to begin his tenure as the new head of digital optimization. My office, with its panoramic view and central location, was deemed the only suitable throne for the heir apparent. The logic was insulting in its simplicity. Because the systems I had built were running smoothly, Hugh assumed they ran themselves. He believed the stability of his company was a natural state of being, like gravity, rather than a constant, defy-the-odds act of engineering that I performed every single day. I didn't fight him. I didn't lay out the 17 different compliance protocols I managed manually. I didn't explain that the digital optimization he wanted was already happening, hidden inside the custom scripts I wrote on weekends. Instead, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It was the same feeling I used to get when a turbine engine was about to fail, a sudden, vibrating stillness before the snap. I nodded, accepted his vague offer of a remote advisory role that we both knew was a polite prelude to a severance package, and watched him leave. The moment the door clicked shut, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I began to pack. But I didn't just pack my personal effects. I packed the company's brain. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one that locked with a physical key, and removed a series of battered, black notebooks. These weren't official company property. They didn't contain trade secrets or blueprints. They contained something far more valuable: the human network. In those pages were the private cell phone numbers of the shift managers who only answered calls after midnight. There were the specific, unwritten negotiation tactics for our steel supplier in Pennsylvania. There were the manual override codes for the legacy inventory system that glitched every time the temperature in the server room rose above 72 degrees. This was the shadow manual, the documentation of how the company actually worked, as opposed to how the corporate handbook said it worked. Then came the digital extraction. I plugged my encrypted external drive into the secure port of my workstation. On the screen, the folder was labeled Project Chimera. To the IT department, Chimera was just a bundle of unauthorized background tasks they kept trying to delete. To me, it was the nervous system of Aegis Manufacturing. It was a suite of Python scripts and database bridges I had written over a decade to force our ancient 1990 seconds era inventory software to communicate with the modern, cloud-based portals of our clients. Chimera was the only reason our invoices matched our purchase orders. It was the only reason we passed our safety audits. It automatically scanned for errors, corrected data formats, and encrypted compliance logs before anyone even knew they were missing. It was my intellectual property, developed on my own time, on my own machine, because the company had refused to pay for a software upgrade 5 years ago. With a few clicks, I disabled the scheduled tasks. I didn't delete the data on the server that would be sabotage. I simply removed the automation. I removed the ghost in the machine. When I pulled that drive out, the computer didn't explode, the lights didn't flicker, the screen simply went back to its default desktop background. But I knew that I had just lobotomized the entire operation. I walked out of the building with my box of belongings, passing the security guard who nodded at me, completely unaware that the woman walking past him was carrying the entire operational logic of the company in her handbag. The first few days of my exile were surreal. I sat in my home study, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own equipment, watching the world of Aegis manufacturing continue through the digital window of my old access tokens. The IT department, in their infinite wisdom, or perhaps their overworked negligence, hadn't immediately revoked my read-only access to the internal messaging channels. I watched as Blake Montgomery moved into my office. He posted photos of his new command center, replacing my ergonomic multi-screen setup with a minimalist desk, a ring light, and a potted succulent. He filled the company intranet with posts about disrupting the status quo and trimming the fat. He held meetings where he threw around buzzwords like synergy and holistic data integration, utterly unaware that the fat he was trimming was actually the muscle keeping the company upright. He ordered the IT team to purge redundant background processes to speed up the servers. I watched the chat logs as the IT technicians, eager to please the boss's son, deleted the remnants of the scheduling tasks I had left behind. They cheered about the improved server latency. They had no idea they had just turned off the automatic breathing apparatus for a patient in a coma. The silence broke on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after my departure. Tuesday was the day the weekly risk and inventory digest was supposed to hit the inbox of every executive. This wasn't just a report. It was the Bible for the procurement team. It told them exactly what raw materials to buy based on a complex algorithm I had designed to predict market fluctuations and shipping delays. At 8:15 a.m., the digest did not arrive. I sat with my coffee, watching the confusion ripple through the messaging channels like a slow-moving wave. First, it was the procurement manager asking if the email server was down. Then, it was the production lead asking why he didn't have the order numbers for the week's copper shipment. Blake jumped into the chat, confident and dismissive. "We're transitioning to a live dashboard," he wrote. "The automated emails are a relic. Use the ERP view." I almost laughed out loud. The ERP view, the enterprise resource planning software, was notoriously inaccurate. It only showed what was scanned into the warehouse, not what was en route, not what was damaged, and certainly not what was needed 3 weeks from now. My script used to fix those numbers before they reached the dashboard. Without it, Blake was telling his team to navigate a minefield using a map that hadn't been updated in 10 years. The procurement team, terrified of making a mistake under the new regime, hesitated. They didn't place the orders. They waited for a report that would never come. And in the high-speed world of just-in-time manufacturing, a day of hesitation is a week of delays. By Thursday, the internal friction began to bleed outward, staining the company's reputation with its external partners. My personal phone rang in the early afternoon. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, the voice was unmistakably stressed. It was David, the senior account manager at Horizon Materials, our largest supplier of aluminum alloys. David and I had a professional rhythm developed over 6 years of solving crises together. He sounded desperate. "Veronica," he said, bypassing the pleasantries. "I've been trying to reach the new guy, Blake, but he's not returning my calls. Our system just flagged Aegis as do not ship. The payment for last month's invoice was rejected again. I knew exactly why. Horizon's invoicing system used a legacy coding format that was incompatible with Aegis's newer banking software. Years ago, I had written a simple handshake script, a lookup table that intercepted their invoices, translated the codes into a format our bank would accept, and approved the payment. It happened in milliseconds, invisible to everyone. When Blake purged the redundant files, he deleted the translation table. He had effectively cut the vocal cords of the payment system. "I can't help you from the inside anymore, David," I said, keeping my voice level, stripping it of any emotional resonance. "I don't have the authorization codes, and frankly, I don't have the job." "I know," I heard. David sighed, the sound of a man watching his quarterly bonus evaporate. But if we don't ship this aluminum by tomorrow, your production line stops. Doesn't Blake understand that? Blake thinks it's a glitch in your API, I replied. He won't fix it because he doesn't know it's broken on his end. But I let the word hang there for a calculated second. I can fix it on your end. David paused. What do you mean? I can write a patch for Horizon's system, I proposed. A preprocessor that formats your invoices to match Aegis's default requirements. It bypasses their internal translation entirely. You won't need them to fix anything. You'll get paid, and the shipment goes out. You're consulting now? David asked. I am starting today, I said. V. Stone Associates. My rate for emergency integration is standard market value, plus an expedited fee. David didn't even ask the price. Send me the contract, he said. Just get the trucks moving. That was the first domino. I hung up the phone and felt the shift. I was no longer the discarded employee. I was the necessary external force. I spent the afternoon writing the patch for Horizon. It took me 3 hours. I billed them $5,000. The payment cleared before dinner. Aegis got their aluminum, the factory kept running, and Blake likely celebrated, thinking his hard stance had forced the vendor to fix their issues. He didn't realize that his vendor had just paid his fired employee to do his job for him. But administrative errors are one thing. Regulatory compliance is another. This is where the office drama turns into a legal nightmare. In the manufacturing of high-tech components, we used volatile chemicals, solvents, industrial cleaners, etching acids. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, requires a strict, daily log of how these chemicals are stored and disposed of. Failing to produce these logs isn't a slap on the wrist, it's a shutdown event. For years, I had automated this. Sensors in the storage lockers sent data to a server where my script aggregated it, encrypted it with a timestamp, and filed it into a secure folder labeled Compliance, Audit, Readiness. It was a zero-touch system. As long as the sensors had power, we were compliant. But Blake, in his crusade to move everything to the cloud, had disconnected the local server where the sensor data was collected. He assumed the new cloud ERP would handle it. It didn't. The cloud system required manual entry, which no one was doing because they thought the old system was still working. The EPA auditor, a notoriously thorough agent named Miller, arrived unannounced 2 weeks later. I wasn't there, but Gwen, a production supervisor who was loyal to me, texted me the play-by-play. Blake greeted Agent Miller with a smile and a tablet, confident that his digital dashboard would dazzle the government official. He led Miller to the conference room and pulled up the compliance folder. It was empty. The last entry was dated the day before I left. 14 days of chemical disposal data were missing. In the eyes of the federal government, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And if you can't prove you disposed of toxic waste safely, they assume you dumped it in the river. Agent Miller issued a notice of violation immediately. He gave the company 24 hours to produce the missing data or face an immediate suspension of their operating license. The panic that ensued was delicious in its predictability. The internal chat channels lit up with frantic messages. Who has the logs? Check the backup. Call it. But it couldn't restore data that was never recorded. Then came the call I had been waiting for. My phone buzzed with the personal number of Hugh Montgomery. I let it ring 3 times, taking a sip of water, composing my voice into a mask of professional indifference. Veronica, Hugh's voice was tight, higher pitched than usual. We have a situation. Hello, Hugh, I answered. I'm surprised to hear from you. I assumed the transition was complete. It's a technical glitch, he lied. The compliance logs aren't syncing. The EPA guy is here. We need you to just... Blake says you must have archived it somewhere obscure. There is no hidden archive, Hugh, I said calmly. The system requires a daily handshake script to pull data from the sensors. When Blake decommissioned the legacy server, he killed the script. The data wasn't hidden. It was never recorded. There was a silence on the line so profound I could hear the hum of the server room in the background. Can you fix it? Hugh asked. Can you retrieve the data from the sensor cache? Possibly, I said. The sensors have a localized memory buffer. It holds about 2 weeks of data before overwriting. If it hasn't been wiped yet, it can be extracted. Great. Hugh exhaled, the relief palpable. Can you come in? Just for an hour? We'll pay you for the day. Hugh. I cut him off gently. I don't do day rates. I run a consultancy firm now. My retainer for crisis management and regulatory recovery is $12,000 per month, with a minimum 4-month contract. Payment is required to initiate services. $12,000? Hugh choked. That's extortion. That's more than your old salary. My old salary was for keeping the ship sailing, I replied. This fee is for raising the Titanic. You aren't paying for my time, Hugh. You're paying for the only person in the state who knows how to decrypt the hex data on those specific vintage sensors before the EPA shuts your factory down. I'm not paying that, Hugh snapped, his ego bruising faster than his wallet. We'll figure it out. Blake has a team on it. You have 20 hours left on your EPA notice, I reminded him. Good luck, Hugh. He hung up. I stared at the phone, knowing exactly what would happen next. He thought he was calling my bluff. He thought he could bully his way out of a technical reality. But math doesn't care about your ego, and regulations don't care about your budget. By refusing my fee, he hadn't saved $12,000. He had just signed the death warrant for his company's Tier 1 status. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Aegis failed to produce the logs. The EPA slapped them with a massive fine and, more importantly, revoked their clean operator certification. This public mark of shame triggered an automatic clause in the contract with Atlas Corp, the defense contractor that provided 40% of Aegis's revenue. Atlas Corp could not legally purchase components from a non-certified vendor. The cancellation letter arrived via courier the next morning, but the consequences didn't stop there. The insurance underwriters, seeing the EPA violation and the loss of the major contract, re-evaluated Aegis's risk profile. They didn't just raise the premiums, they doubled them. Suddenly, the operating costs of the factory skyrocketed just as their revenue plummeted by nearly half. The digital optimization had resulted in a financial hemorrhage. As the chaos unfolded, I sat in my home office, watching the stock ticker for Aegis Manufacturing dip, then dive. My email pinged. It was a message from Sarah Chen, the director of procurement at Atlas Corp. She had heard about the compliance failure. She needed a new supplier, and she needed someone to vet them to ensure they didn't have the same hidden vulnerabilities as Aegis. She asked if I was taking new clients. I smiled. The first real smile in weeks. I typed back, I have an opening in my schedule starting tomorrow. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving on the ruins of the empire that had cast me out. The silence of my office was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of opportunity. The cancellation of the Atlas Corp contract acted as a catalyst, accelerating the decay within the executive corridors of Aegis Manufacturing. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled offices shifted from panicked confusion to a toxic, predatory paranoia that permeated every department. Blake Montgomery, unable to comprehend that his own aggressive ignorance was the root cause of the company's bleeding, refused to look in the mirror. Instead, he looked for scapegoats. He needed someone to blame for the EPA violation and the subsequent flight of their biggest client, and since he couldn't fire the federal government or the free market, he turned his sights on the only targets remaining, the veteran staff who had been quietly holding the operation together despite his interference. He called it right-sizing the workforce, a hollow corporate euphemism for purging anyone who remembered how things used to work before he arrived with his ring light and his buzzwords. He believed that by removing the old guard, he was clearing away the obstacles to his digital utopia. He did not realize he was removing the immune system of a dying organism. The purge began with a brutality that shocked even the most cynical employees. The first casualty was Gwen Rios, the production scheduling manager. Gwen was a fixture of the company, a woman who had been navigating the chaotic tides of the factory floor for 15 years. She didn't need a dashboard to tell her if the injection molding machines were running too hot. She could tell by the smell of the air and the pitch of the hydraulic whine. She was the human buffer between the impossible demands of sales and the physical realities of manufacturing. Blake fired her on a Monday morning, escorting her out of the building with a security guard, as if she were a corporate spy. Her crime was resistance to innovation. Specifically, she had refused to implement his new dynamic scheduling software, a cloud-based application that looked beautiful on an iPad but failed to account for the mandatory cooling time required for high-grade steel. Gwen had argued that following the software's schedule would warp the metal and ruin the molds. Blake saw this as insubordination. He fired her to make a point. He was wrong. He wasn't removing an obstacle. He was delivering my greatest asset directly to my doorstep. I received a text from Gwen 10 minutes after she was walked out of the parking lot. It was just 3 words. He did it. I didn't reply via text. I simply picked up my keys and drove to the diner down the street from the industrial park, the one where we used to hide during audits to drink bad coffee and solve impossible problems. She was sitting in a booth, staring at a cardboard box containing a potted plant and 15 years of awards. She looked shell-shocked, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped a mug of tea. I slid into the booth opposite her. I didn't offer her sympathy, because sympathy doesn't pay the mortgage. I offered her a pen. I placed a contract on the table between us. It was for the position of Senior Operations Analyst at V. Stone Associates. The salary was double what she had been making at Aegis. She looked at the number, then at me, her eyes widening. "Veronica," she whispered, "how can you afford this?" I took a sip of my coffee and smiled, a cold, tight expression. "Because unlike Hugh Montgomery, I know exactly what you are worth. You aren't just a scheduler, Gwen. You are the only person in Arizona who knows the capacity limits of every machine on that floor. I'm not hiring you to work for me. I'm hiring you to be the memory that they just tried to erase." She signed the paper before her tea went cold. 2 days later, the purge continued, fueled by Blake's desperate need to assert control. He fired Jonah Hill, the lead maintenance engineer. Jonah was a man of few words and grease-stained hands, a mechanical genius who could fix a $1 million robotic arm with a wrench and a piece of wire. Blake let him go for failure to adhere to digital ticketing protocols after Jonah had manually deactivated a conveyor belt that Blake wanted to keep running despite a safety warning light. Jonah knew that ignoring that light would strip the gears within 6 hours. Blake thought the light was a sensor glitch and wanted to maintain throughput velocity. I hired Jonah immediately. We set him up in the spare office of the suite I had just leased in the tech park across town. With Gwen and Jonah on my payroll, V. Stone Associates now possessed more institutional knowledge about Aegis's machinery than Aegis did. We were no longer just a consultancy. We were a government in exile. We were the shadow company, operating with all the expertise and none of the overhead, waiting for the inevitable collapse of the host body. As the weeks turned into months, the industry began to notice the seismic shift. Manufacturing is a small, gossipy world. Procurement officers talk to logistics managers at trade shows. Truck drivers talk to warehouse foremen at loading docks. The word on the street was that Aegis was unreliable, dangerous, and hemorrhaging talent. The rumors spread that their shipments were late, their specs were off, and their leadership was erratic. Conversely, V. Stone Associates was gaining a reputation for miraculous turnarounds. We were the fixers. We were the ones you called when the digital transformation nightmare threatened to sink your business. Competitors of Aegis began to call me. They didn't want to steal my trade secrets. They wanted to know how to absorb the market share that Aegis was losing. They smelled blood in the water, and I was the one selling the shark cages. I remember a specific meeting with the CEO of a rival firm, a man named Robert Sterling, who ran a fabrication plant in Ohio. He flew out to meet me, sitting in my conference room with a look of desperate curiosity. He had been trying to poach Aegis's clients for a decade with no success. Now, suddenly, they were calling him Veronica, he asked, leaning over the mahogany table. "What is happening over there? We're getting RFPs from companies that have been loyal to Montgomery for 20 years. Is it really that bad?" I looked at him, calm and composed. "It's worse," I said. "They haven't just lost their way, Robert. They've lost their language. They don't know how to talk to the machines anymore, and they don't know how to talk to the vendors. They are operating on momentum alone, and friction is about to catch up with them." I helped him structure his intake protocols to handle the sudden influx of orders. I helped him rebuild his compliance framework so he could bid on the defense contracts that Aegis had forfeited. I wasn't stealing Aegis's business, I was simply building the landing pads for the customers who were already jumping out of the burning plane. Every contract I signed was another nail in the coffin of the company I had built, and yet I felt no guilt. I was simply charging market rate for the reality check they had refused to accept for free. Back at the glass tower of Aegis, the final, fatal blow to their operations was self-inflicted, born of hubris and a desperate need for a public win. Blake, feeling the walls closing in and the board breathing down his neck, attempted a Hail Mary play. He decided to execute a massive migration of the partner portal, the critical digital gateway where suppliers submitted invoices, distributors tracked shipments, and clients managed their orders. He wanted to merge the legacy database with his new, flashy interface to create a seamless, end-to-end user experience that he could show off in the quarterly investor presentation. He called it Project Unify. He scheduled the migration for a Friday night, assuming it would be a simple data transfer, a copy-and-paste operation that would be finished by Saturday morning. He did not know because he had fired the only people who could have told him that the legacy database was not a standard SQL server. It was a fragile, custom-built ecosystem held together by a series of load-bearing scripts I had written 7 years ago to prevent data corruption during high-volume transfers. These scripts were the digital equivalent of the support beams in a mine shaft. They were invisible, uncredited, and absolutely essential. When Blake initiated the transfer, his new, off-the-shelf migration software identified my custom scripts as unrecognized code anomalies or redundant bloatware. The software prompted him to clean the data. He clicked yes. The collapse was instant, total, and deafening in its silence. The partner portal didn't just glitch, it vanished. It imploded. For 72 hours, the digital heart of the company stopped beating. No supplier could submit an invoice. No truck driver could access a shipping manifest to know what they were hauling. No customer could track an order. The supply chain didn't just slow down, it hit a brick wall at 60 miles an hour. Thousands of tons of raw materials were stranded on loading docks across the country because the digital handshakes required to move them had ceased to exist. The drivers, unpaid and frustrated, simply drove away. The raw materials sat rotting in the sun. I watched the chaos unfold from the serenity of my new office. My monitors were humming with green status bars, my clients were operating at peak efficiency, their supply chains optimized by the very logic Blake had deleted. On my secondary screen, I had the public news feed open. A trade journal had picked up the story. Aegis Manufacturing suffers catastrophic data failure, logistics network paralyzed. The headline was in bold red letters. Blake was frantically posting on social media, apologizing for the unforeseen technical headwinds and promising a swift resolution. He was using words like resilience and agile response, trying to spin a fatal wound as a flesh scratch. But in manufacturing, you cannot spin a lack of product. You cannot iterate your way out of a pile of missing inventory. The board of directors, finally waking up from their slumber, realized that the digital transformation was actually a digital lobotomy. It was in the middle of this blackout, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt eerily similar to the day I was fired, that Hugh Montgomery finally came to see me. I saw his luxury sedan pull into the parking lot of my office complex through the blinds of my window. It was moving slowly, hesitantly. It was late afternoon, the Arizona sun casting long, harsh shadows across the asphalt, turning the world into high-contrast noir. Hugh walked toward the glass doors of V. Stone Associates with a gait that was completely stripped of his usual arrogance. He looked smaller, deflated. His suit, usually immaculate, looked rumpled, as if he had slept in it, or perhaps hadn't slept at all. He wasn't carrying his tablet. He wasn't on his phone. He was just a man carrying the crushing weight of a ruined legacy. I buzzed him in. The sound of the magnetic lock releasing echoed in the quiet lobby. Gwen looked up from her desk in the front reception area, a desk made of real oak, much nicer than the particle board cubicle she had at Aegis. She didn't smile. She didn't offer him a visitor badge. She simply nodded at him. A cold, professional acknowledgement of a former acquaintance who no longer held power over her life. The silence between them was heavy with everything that hadn't been said, a thick tension you could cut with a knife. Hugh walked past her, avoiding her gaze, and entered my office. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the framed certifications on my wall, the same certifications that used to hang in the hallway of his building. The awards for excellence in operations that he had once handed me with a distracted smile. Now, they hung here, mocking him. "Veronica," he said. His voice was raspy, broken, as if he had spent the last 3 days shouting at servers or begging bankers. "We need to talk." I gestured to the leather chair opposite my desk. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer him water. I didn't ask him how he was. I sat behind my desk, my hands folded on top of a thick leather binder, and waited. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that the air felt charged with it. He sat down and rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of exhaustion that aged him 10 years in a moment. "The portal is down," he stated, his voice hollow. "The consultants from Chicago. The ones we paid a fortune to. They can't fix it. They say the data architecture is incomprehensible. They say pieces are missing. They say it's like trying to rebuild a bridge when someone has stolen the blueprints. The pieces aren't missing, Hugh," I said softly, my voice devoid of malice, simply stating facts. "They were deleted." Blake removed the structural supports because he didn't understand what they were holding up. He treated load-bearing walls like wallpaper. Hugh sighed, a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to rattle in his chest. "We are bleeding out, Veronica. Atlas is gone. Horizon is gone. The stock is trading at $18. The board is talking about a vote of no confidence. They are going to oust me." He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red, pleading. "I need you back. Not as a consultant. As the chief operating officer. I'll fire Blake. I'll do it today. I'll give you his salary and mine combined. I'll give you stock options. Just come back. Come back and turn the lights back on. Fix the code. Save the company." It was a generous offer. A year ago, it would have been the validation I had craved, the crowning achievement of my career. But looking at him now, I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. He still didn't understand. He thought this was a negotiation about money or titles. He thought the company was a machine that just needed a mechanic. He didn't realize that the company he was trying to save no longer existed. It was a ghost, walking around in a suit, waiting to fall over. "I can't accept that offer, Hugh," I said. "Name your price," he shot back, desperation sharpening his tone into a jagged edge. "Double the stock options, a seat on the board, anything. I will give you the keys to the kingdom." I opened the leather binder in front of me and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. It wasn't a contract. It was a simple line graph, printed in crisp color. The line started low on the left and curved upward in a steep, exponential trajectory. "This is the quarterly revenue projection for V-Stone Associates," I explained calmly. "In 6 months, my firm has generated more billable revenue than I earned in my entire 13-year tenure at Aegis. I have 8 active retainers with the largest manufacturers in the sector. I employ your former best engineer and your former best scheduler, and they are both making more money than they ever did working for you. I have a waiting list of clients who are leaving you to work with me." Hugh stared at the graph, his eyes tracing the line that represented his competition's success that was built entirely on the foundation of his failure. He looked at the numbers, the undeniable mathematical proof of his mistake. "I am not looking for a job, Hugh," I continued, my voice steady and low, filling the room. "I am building an empire. And frankly, fixing your broken portal would be a conflict of interest with my current clients. They pay me to ensure their supply chains are stable, and right now, their greatest stability comes from the fact that they are not depending on Aegis manufacturing. Saving you would hurt them, and I am loyal to my clients." Hugh looked up from the paper, his face pale, the blood draining away as the finality of the situation hit him. The reality was finally sinking in. He wasn't talking to an employee he could bully or bribe. He was talking to a rival he had created. "You planned this," he whispered, the accusation weak and toothless. "You knew the system would crash. You set a trap. I didn't set a trap, Hugh. I corrected him, leaning forward slightly, locking eyes with him. I simply removed the safety net. You gave my office to your son because you thought my job was easy. You thought the silence of a smooth operation meant nothing was happening. You didn't respect the work, so you lost the benefit of it. You thought you could replace competence with charisma. I paused, letting the words land with the weight of a gavel in a quiet courtroom. You didn't just give him a room with a view, Hugh. You gave him the controls to a machine he didn't know how to fly. I didn't destroy your company. I just took my intellectual property, my institutional memory, and my people with me. I took everything that actually made Aegis work. You kept the building and the logo, I kept the competence. And now, you are paying the market price for the difference. Hugh stood up slowly, like an old man rising from a park bench. He looked around the office one last time, as if looking for a way to undo the last 6 months, as if the answer might be hidden in the corner, but there was no undo button. There was only the math, cold and unforgiving. He turned and walked out of the door without another word. He walked past Gwen, who didn't look up from her work, past the humming servers of my new operation, and out into the heat. He looked like a ghost fading into the sunlight. 2 weeks later, the press release hit the wire. It was the final epitaph. Aegis Manufacturing Group was being acquired by a European industrial conglomerate for a fraction of its previous valuation. It was essentially a salvage operation, a fire sale of assets. The press release cited strategic restructuring and market headwinds, the polite language of failure. It announced the immediate resignation of Hugh Montgomery and the departure of Blake Montgomery to pursue other entrepreneurial opportunities. The reality was far harsher. Hugh was forced into early retirement, his legacy in tatters, his fortune diminished. Blake was quietly let go, toxic and unemployable in the sector, his reputation permanently stained by the magnitude of his failure. The new owners brought in their own management team. They spent millions of dollars over the next year trying to rebuild the vendor relationships that Blake had torched. They hired expensive firms to rewrite the code that I had carried out in my pocket. They managed to stabilize the ship, eventually, but it was a shadow of its former self. It was just another factory now, struggling to meet quotas, fighting for scraps in a market it used to dominate. The soul of the company was gone, residing now in the offices of V. Stone Associates. As for us, we continued to grow. We moved into a larger facility the following year, a sleek building with a view of the mountains. Gwen became my vice president of operations, running the floor with the same iron-willed competence she had always possessed. Jonah became the head of our technical audit division, teaching young engineers how to listen to machines. We didn't just survive the collapse of Aegis, we thrived on it. We built a fortress on the ground where they had tried to bury us. 6 months after the acquisition, I received a notification on my professional profile. It was a direct message from Blake Montgomery. He was listing himself as a digital strategy consultant now, a title that made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my office. The message was brief, stripped of the buzzwords that used to clutter his speech, sounding almost humble. Veronica, it read, I'm working on a project for a logistics startup. We're having trouble with the legacy inventory sync. I know you had a script for that. Would you be willing to grab coffee and share some best practices? I'd appreciate your insight. I looked at the message. I thought about the 13 years of missed birthdays, the late nights, the stress, and the silent pride I had taken in keeping his father's company afloat. I thought about the day he moved his ring light onto my desk and erased my work. I thought about Gwen crying in the diner. I didn't reply. I didn't block him. I simply archived the message into a folder I kept for old business, a digital graveyard for things that no longer mattered. I had work to do. My clients were waiting, the systems were humming, and the silence in my office was exactly the way I liked it, productive, profitable, and mine. There is a lesson here, though most executives only learn it when they see their stock price flatlining and the auditors walking through the door. They think expertise is a commodity that can be replaced by a title or a degree. They think the systems run themselves. But the truth is, the machinery of the world is held together by the people who know where the wires go. And if you treat those people like furniture, don't be surprised when they decide to move house and take the foundation with them. True power isn't about who has the loudest voice in the boardroom, it's about knowing who holds the keys to the engine. My departure wasn't an act of surrender, it was a strategic withdrawal that proved silence is often louder than any shout. If you have ever quietly packed your box and walked away from a place that refused to see your value, know that you are not alone. Sometimes, your absence is the most powerful statement you can make. If this story spoke to you, please like, comment, and share it with someone who is still finding the courage to know their worth.